If you've been paying any attention to the national USA real estate market, there's been a lot of doom and gloom and a lot of fear going out there about owning a home. As a real estate agent for the last 16 years, nearly 17 years, I'm telling you this is nothing new. There's always been negative news about owning a home. You have to understand that in order to make very important financial decisions, you need to have a principled approach to owning a home. And you need to really focus in on controlling your emotions, because sometimes emotions will breed a lot of negativity, and oftentimes if you're feeding off negativity and bad emotions, you make really poor decisions. At least I do. So I think it's important that as a home buyer that you really understand that in order to make a good, sound financial decision, you need to have a principled approach to home buying. In the news, I often will hear people say, it's a great idea to own a home. I hear a lot of people say it's a terrible time to own a home. And I think it's important to really figure out what is best for you and your family when you decide if you're going to be owning a house or not. I know that it's easy to really feed into fear and really have right now, all the rage in 2026 is to have a defeatist attitude, that the whole world's against you, everything sucks. There's a big movement right now, I'm 40 years old, to really hate on your parents and boomers. There's been a lot of new articles coming out that the boomers are the most selfish generation ever. The boomers had the easiest life ever. And I just take a step back and I'm just like, what are you talking about? Why is that generation the easiest generation ever? And when you look back at things, and when history will look over things, yes, there's some positive things that my parents went through regarding financial situations. But when my dad was born in 1952, he didn't own his first house until he was 40. And when I look at my dad's life, my dad, a lot of his friends went to Vietnam War and they died. They had to go through the whole Vietnam War and that fiasco there. And a lot of boomers that people hate on is that they don't realize that they went through terrible stuff, and that's just a part of life. And we've gone through terrible stuff too. There's nothing unique about the human existence. I don't know where in the world, in time history, that here living in the U.S. is not the best nation to ever live in. Are there challenges? Yes. But what I've learned as a human being and as a dad, as a man, that if I can focus in on what I can do to make life better, usually that's the best thing. I think it's really important that we take ownership of our lives and figure out what we want in life. And there's no greater nation than the US of A. And there's so many opportunities here that you can fight and find your way here in the US. It's challenging, it's hard, but it's never been easy. And I don't like the finger pointing towards boomers saying that it is so easy for them to figure things out. I don't like that, because I think it's a defeatist attitude, and I think it's permeating our whole culture that life sucks, everything sucks. I'm so mad at everybody. And that's I think it's a cancer in our society when we have this defeatist attitude. So regarding the boomers, it was never been easy for the boomers. And I know I'm gonna get a lot of hate for defending my parents' generation. But when you look at things from a home ownership standpoint, you look at rates in the 1980s, they're close to 20%. They're about certain years they're at 18% interest rate on a 30-year mortgage. But you might say, oh my goodness, they bought houses for $50,000, this or that. I understand, but you have to understand that there's inflation and there's adjusted inflation. And we're talking about Des Moines, Iowa. I'm not talking about San Francisco. I'm not talking about New York City. I'm talking about Des Moines, Iowa, where the American dream of homeownership does exist, and it is very much attainable. A lot of times when I hear podcasts, when they are so down on owning a home, they focus on a key ratio, and that ratio is median income compared to median home price. Here in Central Iowa, according to the Des Moines Partnership Group, the median Central Iowa income is right around $100,000. And when you listen to these podcasts, when they say homeownership is not tenable, you cannot do it, life sucks, everybody hates you, you suck, young kid, you can't own a house. When I hear these people, they are either the super wealthy. Secondly, they're talking about their specific market. When you look at their specific market, their ratio between median income and median sales price is usually 10 to 1. We're talking about the big cities like San Francisco, New York City, and certain other parts, many other parts of the nation. And that is true. If you're 10 to 1 right now, yes, home ownership is going to be impossible. And that is really unfortunate. It's really hard. But as an American citizen, and I think it's important that if you want the American dream of home ownership, and I know people hate this, but the reality is that you might have to make decisions to live in a community that fits your family where you can achieve the American dream of home ownership. Des Moines is consistently voted one of the best middle-sized cities in the whole entire nation. Des Moines is fantastic. The cost of living is wonderful. And I can tell you a story about, I had some clients, they bought a house, I think it was in 2012 in San Francisco, and that's when the market was completely down. They bought it, in 2012, I think they bought it for $300,000. The house appreciated to right around $500,000. It was a 1,000 square foot house, no basement, attached garage. So that was incredible opportunity for them in San Francisco. But what they decided was, we don't want to raise our kids here. It's so expensive here that we're going to pick an affordable city to live in. They picked Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa to live in. So they used all the proceeds that they bought a house from 1,000 square foot, and then they turned around with the equity they had, and they bought a house in Johnston that had over 3,000 square feet, and they had enough equity that they bought it for cash. So the point is, their dollar went way further here in central Iowa. Here's the deal. You have to understand that when they bought that house in San Francisco, there's a lot of national pundits who are saying, don't own a house. It's a terrible idea. The next recession is going to come from 2008. But they made a principled decision to own a house in San Francisco that made sense for their family. And then they bought, and then after a few years of owning a house, the house appreciated, the market rebounded, they sold it and had enough equity to buy a house all cash here in Des Moines, a nicer house, triple the size, cost of living way down, and they moved here to central Iowa to achieve the American dream of home ownership. I know this is crazy to think about, but I think it's important to realize that if you want to own a house, and sometimes in these big cities, if you just move about 30 minutes from the heart of the city, there's affordable real estate. I would love to have a loft in Chicago overlooking, Lake Michigan. I would love that. I can't afford it. Just because you want something doesn't mean I'm entitled to it. So I think it's important that you understand. The next thing I think is really important for home buyers to really focus in on is that entitlement is poison. And I think that you have to understand that when you think you're entitled to something without working for it, doesn't mean you guarantee you get it. Even like in athletics, I used to play basketball back in the day. Just because I worked really hard in practice and I shot more than everybody, doesn't mean I get any playing time. Doesn't mean we're going to win the game. But all you can do is put the effort in. And when you put the effort into things, it changes you as a person. You value hard work and you go for it. The next thing I think, the reality, before I get into the principles, is that you have to understand that home ownership and owning a home is not a good investment when you compare it to an index fund. But oftentimes when you own a house, it's a better investment than renting the same type of house. You got to get technical. And so I think that we'll talk more at another time about how I'm not an anti-renter. I think renting does have a purpose. What I'm anti is renting a home aimlessly, not having a plan. I think it's important to have a plan and then using renting as a tool to go from there. Because when you rent or you own, you're paying someone's mortgage. When you rent a house, you're paying the landlord's mortgage. Right now, there's a lot of institutionalized LLCs owning properties. So BlackRock's buying a bunch of properties. So I think right now, when there's so much negative publicity about owning a house, sometimes I'm wondering if it's these huge corporations pushing this agenda so they can sweep in and buy affordable real estate so they can rent that to you. Never forget, the person that owns the house you rent the house from is called the landlord. And I am concerned that people are buying into a serfdom lifestyle where they believe that, I can't own a house, so I'm going to rent from somebody, from a landlord, and create a serfdom society. Home ownership is consistently a much better investment compared to renting the same type of house. And I have countless stories of that. So either you're going to pay your own mortgage or you're going to pay somebody else's. You choose. All right, so there's a lot of emotions right now. I'm gonna get into the 7 principles to owning a house in an unknown market. When there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of trepidation, here's the deal. Owning a house, there's always fear. Making a big financial decision like this, there's always fear. So how do you navigate through this? And here's what I found that consistently helps my clients when they're deciding to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in owning a house. The first thing I want to focus in on is you got to take ownership of your budget. Figure out how you're spending your money. And it's important that you have a principled approach to you tell where your money goes. Because if you cannot save money, owning a house probably is not for you. If you don't have any control of your finances, then you can't buy. Right now, the unfortunate reality is a lot of people are spending money when they don't need to spend it on. It's horrific right now in our American culture how much money people are spending money on gambling, and then secondly on OnlyFans. It's disgusting. And I think it's important that you take control of that. And I think it's important that that you stop spending money on that stuff and you really get into it and say, why am I spending money on useless apps, betting, so on and so forth. You don't need it all. So what you need to do is start tracking your budget, figure out what you can afford, and go from there. Kind of focus on home ownership or debt. You want to stay about that 35% or below, ideally 25% of your monthly mortgage payment, which when I define mortgage payment, that means your principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and PMI, 25% compared to your gross earnings per month. So if you make $10,000 a month and you have no other debt, then your max payment should be right around that $2,500 to $3,000 range. That's the sweet spot. Again, that's principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. But you gotta make sure you have control of your budget. So really focusing on your budget, and that's really important. The next thing is you schedule a consultation with a qualified real estate agent. 84% of real estate agents have not made any sales in 2026, and we're end of July of 2026. It's easy to get a real estate license. It's really hard to make it a career. It's important that you hire a seasoned vet that knows what they're talking about, that have successfully helped people buy homes, buy and sell real estate. It's so vitally important. The market changes daily. Sometimes it for sure changes weekly, but sometimes it changes daily. So it's important that you hire someone that understands what the market looks like today. It's great to work with your Aunt Peggy Sue, but if she's not made a sale in a year, don't work with her. You decide what you want to do. But my point is, it's important that they understand consulting and what needs to be done. So you schedule a consultation, you tell your agent what your budget is, and you work through the process of owning a house. It's a journey to own a house to find that property, but it's important that you develop a strategy with your trusted buyer's agent. The next thing is, it kind of goes hand in hand with your consultation and budget. These 3 kind of go all hand in hand. You need to determine how much of a down payment you're going to need to do. As a first-time home buyer, there's plenty of programs where you don't have to put any money down, but I think it's important from a savings perspective that you put at least 5% down if you can afford it. Additionally, when you do your consultation, there's a lot of first-time home buyer grants out there that you might qualify. So this can kind of springboard your home ownership journey if you can qualify for $2,500 up to $10,000 grant. And that's a forgivable grant. Usually that's a 5-year commitment to owning the house, but that's really important to understand that if you buy a house regardless, a really big key principle is you need to be thinking about, I want to be in this house for at least 5 years. So when you go to a house, you got to be thinking about, can I be in this house for at least 5 years? Next thing is, after you get your down payment established, you go through your consultation, develop your budget, you get pre-approved with a loan officer. So it's really important that you work with a qualified local real estate loan officer that can get you pre-approved. They will be able to consult you on what your monthly payment will be. You cannot lock in on an interest rate until you have a signed purchase agreement, so it's important that before you look at houses, you email your loan officer and say, hey, I'm looking at XY Street. What would the monthly payment look like? And they can pop out a payment and you can figure out if that fits your budget or not. Home buying can get really emotional and it can cause a lot of fear, but when you have the principles of your budget, what you can afford each month, it really helps home ownership. That really relieves a lot of the stress there. The next thing is when you actually search for your house, then you look at houses that are within your price range and your location. So you want to look at houses that fit your principles of owning a house. So with your home search, you want to do a little bit of legwork. So what this means with your home search is if you're buying it with another person, you need to sit down with that person before you even look at a house. And you write out the 10 attributes you want in a house. And then after you write the 10 things, come into agreement on that, whether the top 10 things you and your spouse or your partner wants to buy. Then what you need to do is weight them. Give them a weight so they add up to 100%. So what that means is a lot of couples, when they're looking to buy a house, there's some tension there at times because sometimes a husband really wants an awesome backyard, but then the wife wants an awesome kitchen. They both say they want the same thing, but then there's a little bit of argument. It's like, I thought we're on the same page. This is an awesome yard. This is a decent kitchen. What's going on? You need to take the next step before your home search and weight them. So that means I want an awesome kitchen. I'm gonna give that 10 points, but I want a good backyard. I'm gonna give it 20 points there. It has to add up to 100. So I think it's really important that if you're buying a house, before you start doing your home search, you figure out the attributes and weight them from there. So your home search, so the more legwork you do before you start looking, the less stressful it is to buy a house. What I'm teaching you to do is create a buying box. A box is a restriction of what you're looking for. And so what that means is if you're looking for a house that fits the criteria, then you look at it. You create parameters there. If your budget is $250,000, do not look at a house at $300,000 because the seller's not going to come down in that price. They won't. Not in the central Iowa market. Right now in the central Iowa market, homes are selling within 3 to 4% of asking price. So sellers are listing their house to sell it where they want to sell it at. So I think it's really important you understand that. The next step after you find the house, when you do all this legwork and work with your real estate agent, loan officer, develop your budget, do the personal work, then you start with the negotiations. Now, the principle about negotiations, you have to have principles going into that. That means, what do you want to buy the house for? When you do your home search, did you do kind of a pre-look inspection with your real estate agent to have an idea what the condition of the property is? Do you ask some questions to the seller, ask what the key condition items are of the roof, the gutters, the siding, the AC, the furnace, all that stuff, windows. Did you do the legwork? Then you begin negotiations. But what's really important about negotiations comes down to financial ability, and motivation. So I could be really motivated as a seller to sell my house for $300,000, or I don't care what I sell it for, but with all my expenses and what I owe on the mortgage, my bottom dollar might be $300,000. So I might list my house for $310,000. I get an offer for $275,000. I'm motivated to sell it, but I don't have the financial ability as a seller to come down. So you got to keep it professional. When you're looking to buy, when you go into negotiations, remember it comes down to motivation and ability of the buyer and the seller. And sometimes if the seller doesn't want to dance with you as a buyer, you just got to walk away. Because you've done all this work with your budget, you've saved money, you've spent time with your loan officer, your real estate agent, you've looked at houses, you gotta be willing to walk away if it doesn't fit your buying box and your principles to buying a house. The emotions, if you spend a lot of time developing these principles, you can walk away with that. The last step is you close on your house. And you have to remember, like with the closing, it's a summary of everything that you've done this far. So when you go to closing, if you've done all this work and all these principles going into it, closing goes a lot smoother. But the principle about the reality with the closing, it's your final loan commitment. It's your mortgage. If you don't pay, you can't stay in the house. You have to remember, it wraps everything together with your loan process. When you're going through your loan process, they're buying, a lot of times you do steps of the loan process to get fully approved, but when you go to closing, it's a summary of everything you've signed and a summary of understanding that you're going to be paying your mortgage off each month. You're going to be doing your taxes and insurance every month. So when you understand that closing is to get the keys to the house, but also a reminder that if you've done your work with your loan officer, you're just signing a summary of everything you signed at this point. Again, these are 7 principles you need to understand when you're buying a home. If you have any questions, please reach out. I'd love to help you. Whether you're in Central Iowa, I'd love to be your real estate agent. If you're from out of state, if you have any questions, you're looking for a good local real estate agent, I'm a part of several national networks. I'd love to connect you with a good local real estate agent there. But it's important. There's a lot of insanity going on right now, and there's some real scary stuff, and I totally get it. But when you buy a house, you got to determine what's best for your family. And oftentimes, if you're willing to be in a location or a community for at least 5 years, and you can afford it, it is often much better to own the same type of house compared to renting the same type of house. Because either you're going to pay your own mortgage or you're going to pay somebody else's.